Hello, everyone. I'm Janet Salmons, Research Community Manager with Sage MethodSpace, and I'm delighted today to be joined by Trena Paulus and some of the contributors to this special issue about digital workflows. So we will get started in a moment, but first, if you are new to MethodSpace, this is a blog community hosted by Sage Publishing, and we're interested in everything to do with designing, planning, conducting, analyzing research, writing about it, sharing results in all different kinds of ways. And you can see at the center of this Venn diagram, we have teaching and learning, because we think that whether you are a brand new researcher or an experienced researcher, we all have something to learn. And that's why I love having these kinds of opportunities, because I always learn something, and I hope you will too. So to get started, I'm just going to ask Trena if you would please just briefly define what you mean by digital workflows.
Yeah, thank you so much. So for us, as we were bringing this special issue together and thinking about inviting contributors, we had gotten a lot of questions about that as well. What do you mean by a digital workflow? And so we wanted to have the chance to explore that a little bit. First of all, it's going to look different for everyone depending on what their research design is, but we're thinking of it now as a reflexive digital research workflow, which is a research design, much like any research design, a plan that you put together, but it really pays attention to aligning methodological decisions with technological decisions in a way that intentionally considers the role of digital tools and digital spaces, especially when it comes to the possible consequences of that.
Right.
A lot of times we don't think too much about moving interviews onto Zoom or using social media as data, but really all those decisions do have intended and unintended positive and negative consequences. So a workflow is really, how do we intentionally plan for that and consider that? So in brief, that's how I would define it today, even though it's kind of still a definition in progress.
Well, I think these are very important questions to consider. And in some ways, as people have become more accustomed to using technology, it's almost like, oh, well, gee, we can just do this using this particular tool without realizing that, there are a lot of other, factors to consider. So I'm delighted that we have this great roundtable, and with the miracle of technology, we can be together from across the miles. So I want to just ask each of you to just briefly introduce yourself and the article that you and perhaps co-authors contributed to this issue. So Susan, why don't you start?
Hi, everybody. I'm Susan Nordstrom. I'm at the University of Memphis. I'm an associate professor of qualitative research methodology. And my article is entitled Good, Bad, and Hopefully Not the God Trick, Technological Systems and Qualitative Inquiry. And for my piece, what I was really trying to think about was working with the etymology of the word technology as an artful and creative system, and then going back through the history of Qual to think about how technology has been an ever-present thing, even though we may not now today consider something like a notebook a technological invention, but for some time it was. And the ways that we continue to use these tools in different ways with each project, and how the tools become these responsive elements of a qualitative project, then we can start to see maybe how the history of qualitative inquiry has always been one of technology. And then to begin to kind of start to think about what Trena was just talking about, like how this actually gets picked up, how we might think about this in qualitative classrooms and teach it as something that it needs to be reflexively used and taught in our projects.
Right, thank you. What you, Shannon?
Hi, everyone. I'm Shannon Perry. I'm a doctoral candidate in learning, leadership, and organization development at the University of Georgia. Most of my research really focuses on affective experiencing in creative communities of practice, including in online spaces. And so my article that I contributed, Embodying Affective Interactions Online, Enacting Posthuman Methods in Virtual Spaces, is really looking at how posthuman philosophies, theories, concepts can contribute to our thinking about how to reconfigure some of our humanist rooted qualitative methods for virtual spaces, as well as how posthuman theories can help us kind of untangle these binaries that still exist between, for example, disembodied and disembodied, offline, online.
Right. How about you, Darcy?
Hello, my name is Darcy. I'm a doctoral candidate at Indiana University. Basically my paper explored centering disability and diverse body minds in qualitative inquiry, specifically at the intersection of digital tools and technology. So I kind of explored the interaction between time and the unique temporal landscapes that disabled people experience and navigate. So I specifically took up this idea of crip time, and how digital tools and qualitative inquiry might enable or disable crip time for disabled people.
Great, thank you. And Luke?
Thanks. I'm Luke Cousineau. I'm an instructor in the School of Health and Human Performance and Recreation Management at Dalhousie University in Halifax. And this paper with my co-authors, Corey Johnson, Diana Perry, and Eric Felice, comes out of work that we did together at the University of Waterloo. So I just want to make sure that Waterloo gets its appearance here, even though I'm not there anymore. Our paper, Methodology in Motion, Reflections on Using Appnography for the Study of Dating Apps, is an outgrowth of a previous chapter that myself and Corey Johnson and another colleague, Harrison Oakes, authored about the use of apps and how, particularly around the study of dating apps and geosocial networking apps, the app itself, the platform itself and the changes of that platform over time and over the study time become sort of really essential parts of how we must consider the technology and its interaction with both our methodological decisions, but also the necessary outcomes of our research. And so this paper is really sort of taking that conceptual work that we did in the chapter and really talking about how it can apply sort of in the real practice of research.
Well, thank you all. And for those who are watching this, if you're intrigued by these introductions, you'll be able to find links to these articles on methodspace.com along with the video and other related materials. So let's get started. We want to have a real conversation to be able to kind of bring in all these different perspectives. And but because we're doing scholarly work, let's start by talking a little bit about theories and how theories shape our engagement with digital tools as qualitative researchers. And just put your hand up if you want to speak, and we'll kind of go around and see what each of you wants to say.
I guess I'll start. I agree very much with Shannon that I kind of feel like our understandings of technology within a humanist framework has ultimately limited our research imaginaries, what we can do, the designs we can do, and all of these things. And so I think it's incumbent that maybe we need to start really thinking about qualitative research as this embodied materialist thing that we do with lots of different things and peoples and cultures. And then that way it gives us a little bit more of a base to be thinking, I think, I am more imaginatively, because if we're constantly, reducing things back to the human, back to humanism, then we're kind of hamstringing ourselves in a way.
So trying to more consciously integrate the technological, kind of non-human elements as we're describing things. So rather than seeing those, as simply a medium for communication, to, look at the dimensions more fully. What else? Who else has something to add, or a different?
I can jump in here. Yeah, so I mean, my article is definitely all about how I found post-human theories very useful for considering how I might adapt, traditionally humanist methods that you might unfold in person to the virtual space. So just jumping in and elaborating on what Susan just said in her article, she's really starting to think about technologies as embedded in systems. And post-human theorists are certainly invested in that project. And within that also, looking at how, when we look at our embodied experiences and the materiality of our experiences within these systems, these binaries start to break down. So I mentioned, binaries where we oppose the material and the discursive, the offline and the online, the embodied, the disembodied. These are things I'm sure that you have all heard people, it comes up in conversations about how an online class or online interaction is different from how someone experiences an in-person interaction, perhaps. But when we start to investigate these things, thinking about how we actually experience collaborations or interactions online, these binaries, these dualisms start to break down. And that's something that I think Darcy definitely talks about in her article as well. But just that many other scholars, including Shanbane in the Manifesto for Teaching Online, are really questioning, are they so opposed? And does the in-person always have to be the privileged mode? So I think that post-human theories really, in the ways that they are seeking to untangle those hierarchical binaries, really are useful for thinking about our interactions in digital worlds, and that we're already here, Jessica Lester and Trena Paulus, they talk about it, as well as other people, that other scholars, that our interactions with technology are such that they are changing the way that we enact our human beingness, even as we are designing them as well. So,
okay. So Darcy, do you want to jump in since your name was mentioned?
Okay. Thank you, Shannon, for that. Yeah, I think that I engage with critical disability theories. That's so funny to say I engage with, because it's really like a worldview, because disabled people matter and have always mattered. So disability justice work is like ingrained in everything I do. And how I move through the world. And so I bring that into my work and my writing. And so I think that's also like how I interact and engage with technological tools. Like, I can't imagine a world where I didn't have technology, because I wouldn't be able to interact with so many people that I love now. So I engage a lot with crip theory in my paper, in my work, and I'm really interested in this idea of cripping spaces. So crip theory really like challenges these like normative notions of like what's supposed to be and what's always been. And I think that crypt theory has a lot of liberating and radical possibilities to challenge like taken for granted notions of like humanness. So I also think that like crypt theory works really well with Sylvia Winter's work. So like when I think about like the present absence, I think that's like an interesting thing to think about in relationship to like who we get to who's privileged in like in-person spaces, which is then captured in like our methods versus like online spaces. So that's like the absent present. And I hope that my article and like I think other works too, like disability activists have long been calling for folks to pay attention to the online worlds. There's this documentary Unrest by Jennifer Brea, and she does wonderful work where she crypts time in methodological ways. And she does basically most of her interviewing from bed with other folks in bed. And it's all online interactions. And I think that's a really wonderful way to kind of challenge us as researchers. I don't think one time in that documentary she says she's doing qualitative research, but I think we can learn a lot from people that don't actually say they're doing qualitative research, because what she's doing is disability justice research. So I guess that's my answer.
Anything you want to add, either about what's been discussed or a different theoretical perspective?
Only to say that as I listen to the other folks in the space, it's sort of all of this comes back to the core of how we theorized sort of an ethnography perspective, which is that for me, as the perhaps the person that started us down that journey during my PhD work, was saying, but all of this like the platform we choose, even if we're talking about GSNAs, which are a tiny sub portion of the larger sort of app landscape, even within that little portion, which one we choose matters because of the dynamics of platforms and because of both the influence that the platforms we have on platforms, but that they have on our interaction, right? Tinder is very different than Bumble, even though the dynamic of the actual platform is quite similar. And so then it's this negotiation of also the agency of the technology on the user, and then the meta version of that we must consider, in my opinion, as researchers in that space, right? To be like, oh, we did research on Facebook. Well, that means something really important and really tangible. And so it was a way to start getting at those ideas for us. And I think that really aligns quite well with the other perspectives that I've just heard from the other folks in this space. And I find I'm so interested in everybody else's sort of work and perspective here, having not met any of you in virtual space or otherwise.
Right. Well, I think, a couple of things that came to my mind, thinking about this with the human and non-human, and how to, look at those in a coherent way. That situational analysis, I don't know if any of you are familiar with Adele Clark's work, where she shows an approach to kind of mapping the human and the non-human elements of any kind of topic of research, whether it is technology or not. But the technology certainly has more of a factor, and that's something that I've certainly been very interested in. But the other thing that just strikes me from across the different inputs that you've offered is that we're kind of pushing back against or extending, to put it in a positive way, theoretical perspectives that were developed in an earlier time where, either technology was not so much of a factor, or where, going to Susan's work, not even thinking about, say, something like the analog element, thinking of that as a technology and as a non-human factor. If I'm, I happen to be, a fountain pen fanatic, in addition to being a technology person. So I loved your comments about the notebooks, because I'm all about that with journaling and things like that. But to think, well, that is, even if it's analog, there's a factor that comes into it. And, perhaps those were not, kind of deeply considered by, some of the theorists of the past. Anything you want to add, Trena, before we go to the next question?
Can I add something real quick? I think that we need to kind of go back to history a lot of times, because sometimes I do feel that qualitative inquiry is really great at being ahistorical at times. And I think, especially with technology, we can be thinking, oh, well, we're in this new time and it's all weird. But if we go back and look at what was being said during times, like there was a time when like people were like, why are you writing a letter? What is this? Like, why are you not doing, like, living so close to the people that you would want to talk to? Like, why is there this even need? And so I think when we go back, and I think that this is why doing some of this work with like the materialist historical work really allows us to see that what we're dealing with here is not new. People have been saying, what is this thing? Why are you using it? And it's just kind of, we're recycling that same argument throughout time and pretending that it's new, and it's not. We're just recreating the same fiction, as Betty St. Pierre likes to say.
Yes, and every new technology is going to save education or destroy education, or save research or destroy research. And of course, we're seeing that with AI and OpenAI and ChatGPT right now. I really loved hearing all of these perspectives. I always make students think about theories of technology, because I come from like an instructional design and technology background, and students are always like, I didn't even know there was such a thing as a theory of technology until, we talk about it. But they are all very historical theories of technology that weren't created in conjunction with research methods. And so it's exciting to hear everybody grappling with that. I also struggle with, I feel like there's this dilemma of using technology is becoming so normalized in research that it's hard to get students sometimes to realize. I will never forget, I was sitting in a dissertation defense at the University of Georgia, and it was so normal to the student that to do interviews in person or on FaceTime that it did not occur to this person to even distinguish in the methods section which was which, because in that person's world experience, a FaceTime interview was the same as an in-person interview. And so I really struggle with, you've got a generation, or a lot of us since COVID, who it's become so much a part of our life that that by asking people to stop, take a step back and consider the consequences in some ways feels artificial. But, and I think this goes to Darcy's work and what other people have said as well, is that what is it that's being normalized? What is it that's being assumed? And what are the consequences, maybe from an equity perspective, maybe even first and foremost? I don't know, but those are just some things that are running through my mind as I'm listening to everyone's excellent contributions.
Yes, and that, that's a good segue into our next question. But, I would just to emphasize, some of the points that you made about the equity issue. I work with people who are faculty at institutions. They're not, say, an impoverished person living in a village, but they can't be on the camera and interacting on a platform like this at the same time because they don't have the bandwidth. So, just as one example to what you just said of, well, the person not distinguishing in their method section, what they used, but to consider, well, what are the implications of making that choice? How does that affect your sample? Who do you exclude? what are you looking at, in that FaceTime? How is that different from what you are looking at when you are sitting across from someone? I mean, are you looking at, the books on my shelf and my diploma that one's actually my grandfather's diploma because he's the only other Dr. Salmons? Or are you comparing, how does that compare to, some of you have the blurred background, or if you turn the camera off, they're just all, all those kinds of things. And the point of not even mentioning, in a published article, I have encountered this a million times where, because I'm looking for exemplars to include in things that I'm writing, to illustrate what I'm doing, literature, etc. And, writing to the author of the article and saying, well, you're looking at this online phenomenon. Where did you do the interviews? What tools did you use? It wasn't mentioned in the article. I mean, did you have like a whole, a group of people? I had many people who would respond, well, they were in like the computer lab at their institution doing this research. So even though, they were doing something about online environments, they were actually face to face. So, I think, yes, for some of us who do have the privilege of the access, the digital literacy and availability of the tools, it's second nature, but that, we have to understand that that's not true for everybody. So, that kind of plays into some of these decisions. But that kind of segues into the next question about how emerging tools and spaces are shifting how we define and conceptualize the methodologies, and then what are the concerns that might arise from these shifts, and how might we respond? So I, if you don't mind, I'd like to start with Darcy, because I think some of the things that you brought up do begin to really dig into what some of those implications are, and kind of the assumptions that we might have, especially if we think about, and I don't want to, because you may feel free to take it another direction, but thinking about the kind of research that involves human participants that we want to interact with, using the technology. And I thought, your article really exposed some of the assumptions that we might have about someone, especially if we've recruited people online, maybe we haven't seen them. We don't know, whether, what their, access, literacy, ability, etc., might be. So, maybe you could just build on some of those thoughts a little bit.
That is so nice to ask me to go first and to go first so that I can collect my thoughts. That would be a really awesome way to help access needs. I don't know if anyone has some thoughts.
I think one of the, maybe I'll just jump in here to say, Janet, as you were talking, one of the things that I was considering quite a lot is a real taken for grantedness, right? And this is what Trena is talking about too, right? Just this taken for granted that like, oh, A is the same as B in this context of face-to-face interviews versus, say, FaceTime interviews. And one of the things that I encounter and rub up against when I'm reading or reviewing articles, because I mean, in the field of recreation and leisure and recreation management, there are fewer of us that are really sort of focused in this area. So I wind up getting a number of those, is the taken for grantedness of even the location. So I'm doing research on this Facebook group and I'm talking to these people. So it becomes this sort of layered meta influence of the technology, both on how am I doing the interviews and how am I accessing the people, but also the influence of the platform on the group data and on the interviews and just assuming they're that taken for grantedness of I'm doing this work and it's on Facebook, and that is kind of the end of the exploration. And I understand the difficult push-pull of like how much of this kind of exploration that we're talking about right now can you really fit in an article if that's not what your article is about. But to just sort of make the statement and move on is something that I really struggle with in reading that, because I'm like, this really matters.
Right.
And I often don't see that. And so sometimes when I ask those questions, and I think probably the other folks in this room have had similar experiences, when you start asking those questions, people get really like, that's maybe a lot. Maybe they've never considered it before, or maybe they feel sort of tired by even the question. And so I'm rolling that around. I'm kind of rolling that around all the time. And to hear the two of you bring up those things, I'm like, oh yes, somebody else. Thank goodness.
Right. And I mean, I just personally think that I understand there's a word limit and a length parameters on an article or a book chapter. But I think, we need to encourage writers to give more of an explanation and a rationale, for the choices, that incorporate, some of the kinds of implications that, were brought out in this collection of articles here. So hopefully for those watching this, might, think about, well, how can I succinctly explain, it's kind of part of, it ties into almost positionality and a lot of different dimensions of the research design, but the importance of explaining not only what, but why and how, so that the readers can begin to think about, for their own work, how they might address some of those kinds of questions. What other implications are you finding from the shifts in technology and the technology use?
I can go ahead and jump in here, offer a few thoughts. So I'm really concerned in my own research with the way digital tools and online spaces enable people to collaborate across distances. And so Susan's article made me really think a lot about broadening what we think of as technologies. And a book that I reviewed a couple of years ago for adult learning, it's called Rituals for Virtual Meetings, talks a lot about how when new technologies are emerging, we have to, as people, so their premise is like, how can we use these tools to make our interactions more human? As I'm thinking, as I read the book, I was thinking about how rituals and ways, different processes that we've agreed upon as a society or a group of people are also technologies for how we agree, are conventional ways for interacting in a space. And so when new technologies emerge, digital technologies and tools, we have to engage in that work, whether it's as an instructor, as part of a research team, and figuring out, what are the new processes, social technologies that we can construct around this to do our work in ways that are affective or feel good to us as humans. So that's one point I guess I want to touch on. I think that in my article, I look at a lot of different folks who try to achieve that kind of affective, collaborative, project in the online space through collections of digital technologies. And one thing that I found was that the groups that found they were able to achieve this kind of affective collaboration, they were using technologies that really allowed them to do more than just consume passively digital artifacts or each other's work, and gravitating toward technologies that would enable them to also remix each other's work, for example, to add on to it. And that was part of, adding on to what Luke is saying, thinking about how what these technologies, what these specific applications, specific software are enabling us to do in terms of collaboration. So participants across a variety of studies were finding that when the affordances of a specific technology or software were such that it enabled that that remixing, that integration of different, playing around with different artifacts, then that created a more kind of affective space. And then I'll also just say, to wrap up, and this definitely I think touches on all the articles, but maybe particularly Luke's work and Susan's talking about technologies and systems, having to take a more systemic view, is just the emergence of all these mobile devices and applications that we have now. And so one thing that I found in looking at a bunch of studies and thinking about how I might design a collaborative space in the virtual is that these groups use many different types of applications. It wasn't just Zoom meetings. They might have a group meet. So they, specific to the group's needs, developed their own kind of ecologies of tools to use for their particular participatory or collaborative needs and goals.
Okay.
Thanks, Shannon. I feel good to go now.
Okay.
Okay. I appreciate it, everyone, for being patient. Okay, so I guess I think like I was like really interested in writing and exploring about how technology like might, well, you know, there's really not a ton of disabled qualitative researchers, and that's evidenced in the lack of literature. I mean, like there's Kirschbaum and Price's amazing piece, and like there is some other work, but yeah, not a ton. So I guess I was really interested in how digital tools and technologies could help like bridge that, or maybe so that's why I like wanted to like highlight like just like two very like, I guess I think sometimes very pragmatically or like practically. So I was just thinking like, well, this is two ways like that I have found a lot of help. And also I know a lot of my disabled friends use interviews. They don't so much use qualitative data analysis software, but I tell Jessica Lester all the time, I wish everyone had access to it, because I just think it's the best thing ever, and it has like made my life so amazing. And at the same time, there are like, I've been struggling with it more recently, because some of the like technologies like on my computer like don't always link up, like Dragon. It's like a voice to text, like it doesn't always link up. So that's, you know, but I think that technology will like come and like get there very soon. But like there are issues, right, with our qualitative data analysis software. I didn't speak to that in the paper, but that is like certainly things to be aware of. But like I'm also interested in how digital tools and technology might also limit the kind of research that disabled scholars might be able to do, and like the disciplines that they like could go into, specifically like thinking about crypt time. So I didn't write about this either. You know, I published this paper and it's just like one moment in time of my thinking, and then I've like continued to think about it, which apparently is what you do when you like publish a paper. That's fine. But like, so I'm hoping to do my dissertation in this clinical setting, and it's HIPAA protected data, right? So they want to destroy it after a year. And I want to do conversation, ethno-methodological work with it. So, and I'm interested in disability justice. So I think it's important to transcribe more than just what's said. I'm really interested in embodied language, because people speak in language and more than just like their words. And I don't think like a year is enough for my body. And so like I'm running up against these like time constraints. And so I'm interested in like thinking about how like, yes, we have like AI to like support getting like transcripts of like verbal, like oral transcripts, but like less for like embodied and like all of these. So like these are some of like my questions that I am like grappling with right now. So yes, digital tools and technologies are like amazing, and I really do think that they've like helped me. And I'm also interested in like which disciplines and like what kind of research like may, I mean, I like have a joke with my friends. I'm like, what am I going to do like in the middle of my career when I'm too tired to continue doing medical research? Because I don't know if my body can keep doing this forever. And like, I think that's like a really important like consideration. And I think that does interact with like our technologies and like our limits of technologies.
Thank you. I think, again, you expose a lot of assumptions that, we don't see kind of addressed in the methodological literature. And I think there is a real need for that. So, I think you've teased out some of those points. Anything that you want to add, Trena, about the implications
Man,
of the emergent
yes.
technologies?
Yeah, I'm hearing a theme, which is, can we just all slow down, right? Like, I mean, I feel like what we get caught in this technology trap of going faster and, oh, but the tools are going to make it faster, more efficient, more effective. We do. And I think this is a very American narrative around technology will solve all problems. Technology is our savior. Technology is mostly positive. And I think that, yes, it is, or I wouldn't be in this area. Yes, it is exciting. Yes, it can afford lots of things. I love the idea earlier. I think this was from way back at the beginning of the hour, that we shouldn't always privilege that human is best. It's not that a person is always even in best. Technology is there for us to work with and within. But I do worry also about the emotional toll, the physical toll, the intellectual toll that some of this is taking. Especially as we just assume all the tools should make it easier, and it doesn't necessarily. And I also just love that technology is not always digital tools and spaces. And that made me remember that we weren't even sure a few years ago that we should call it digital tools in digital spaces, because digital is very outdated. And really a technology, as Susan's paper and you all have commented on, a technology is just any tool, digital or not, it could be just physical tool that helps us. It's a process. It's getting a process in place. And so really, and I feel like a lot of people, it's not that they care about what Max QDA or Atlas TI, the technical features of what it can do. What we want to know is, how should we use it for this particular project? That's the workflow, for better or for worse. So anyway, again, I'm all over the place, but thank you for these great ideas and great discussion.
Well, and clearly some of the technologies that are available, especially that are available free or inexpensively, were not designed with research stages in mind. So, some of them may be great, and others, maybe not so much. So, being able to, I think, as you say, the kind of the slowing down, like really grappling with all of the kinds of implications that we've suggested here, may mean that we need to kind of deepen a little bit, rather than spreading out farther, to really understand, as qualitative researchers, we're equipped for that. So one other kind of dimension of the kind of changes in technologies that a couple of you mentioned in your articles, in Susan's work, and also in the in Luke, the article that Luke was a co-author in, looking at what, some of the kind of the visual elements and, artful elements that, kind of add another kind of potential for research. And, I think about, it's interesting to me that, kind of side by side to, the kind of development of online and technology influenced research, we also have a real growing interest in creative methods. And, so in some cases, kind of a fusion between things that are very much analog and creative in all kinds of ways, whether it's poetry, drawings, photography, whatever it may be, with the digital side that allows us to either discuss those, in a platform like we're in now, or even to use tools like shared whiteboards or, kind of shared desktops, shared applications to look at those things together. So I just wondered if anyone wanted to speak to some of those visual elements and artful, creative elements.
I want to jump in and say that something that I really loved about, and Susan mentions this in her article, is that she talks about Zora Neale Hurston and how she used sound recordings as well as visual media as well to really refuse the oversimplification, really, of cultures and experiences. And I think that that is something that we still need to do more of.
Right.
Using all our digital tools that are available to us now that even a few years ago, we didn't have access to. So Darcy, I think Darcy mentioned, did you mention sound, or am I just imagining that? I work a lot with sound, and I think that that is an artful mode that is very much underexplored. And we have, things like digital audio workstations now that you can download for free, and speaking to what Trena was saying as a mode of helping slow down. I think sound is a very kind of artful mode that we can play around with the possibilities that exist there for slowing down, but then also bringing to the forefront these aspects of experience that don't often make it into our, formal research outputs, and exploring the ways that various digital platforms can help us do that.
Right, that we can embed video clips or audio clips so that people can our readers can get that broader sense of the accent or the emotion or the or even kind of background environmental sounds that might influence the ways that we might respond to the situation. And while it brings up other questions about anonymity and things like that, there's still, I think, as you say, it's kind of an understudied. It's something that I have looked at a bit, and I find very intriguing. And I think there will be, as we look at kind of more a multimodal data collection as well as sharing. That's why in my little method space introduction, saying, well, sharing results in all different kinds of ways. I mean, simply transcribing an interview or reducing a multimedia interview like in the space that we're in to just a text kind of transcript, you miss something. Anything else anyone would like to add? Darcy?
I think I think Shannon's point about sound is also so critical if we're going to bring in critical disability studies and crip theory, which we must. If we start considering the role of technologies that I'm thinking about breathing tubes and other devices that make beeps and sounds and these ways of these ways that are also intimately human, that like are so embodied and like are a part of like us, that like become like silenced when we don't like when we just like reduce to like a silent like transcript. And so like, yeah, I think like the sound elements are like really critical to like consider. And I think like CRIP theory and critical disability studies work could be like a really interesting like way to think about like cripping sound and space. Because I always am thinking about, because I feel like, you know, like anytime I like go to the theater or whatever, like I go to a show and there's someone there with like a breathing tube, I feel like everyone around me is thinking, I wish those beeps would stop. And like, I just desire those beeps. Like, I want them in my space and I want them louder. And I think that's like coming from someone who uses a cane. So like everywhere I go, I'm like tapping, you know, I can't sneak up on anyone. And like, I don't want the taps to be erased from like
Mhm.
my talking. Like that just seems so wrong, right? It's like who I am. So I do think that like the ability to embed sound, yes, even though we might have to grapple with new considerations of like anonymity, anonymizing stuff, like maybe our participants might want us to embed their sounds, because maybe the sounds are like part of who we are, you know.
Mhm.
I
Susan?
think Darcy brings up a great point about thinking about our participants in terms of how they're experiencing the world, because that's what they're ultimately, I think any qualitative research study, they are gifting, our participants are gifting us their whatever moment they're sharing in their lives. They're gifting us, they're entrusting us with it. So how are we then doing due diligence with it, doing our very ethical best with it? And I think that I want to link this back a little bit to technology in terms of, we've been talking a lot as if these technologies are available to all people, that all people have high-speed broadband access to do a Zoom interview. They don't. They may not have a phone that can pull, you know, do the app the way that the app, you know, or it has to go on a, I don't know, like, but it seems like this is something that, working and doing research in Memphis, that has a very high poverty rate, and working in rural areas, this is something that I have to be constantly thinking about in terms of, what do the participants actually have access to? Like, what is actually feasible? Instead of thinking, I'm going to do this new thing and it's going to work for everybody, and going like, oh, that just is not something. So I think that we have, and this is kind of the blessing and the curse of being in this middle space and this both and that Shannon talks so beautifully about, is we're both, we need to be thinking about the technology and the humans. And the things that all goes around with it. It's not, we can't tease them out. It's always this kind of entangled thing where it's like, it doesn't, there many times isn't a right way to go. It's just the best way that you could figure out right now.
Yes, I have written about, you know, the kind of the implication of the question that you raised. I mean, while for the researcher, you know, collecting all your data with the same technology with all participants so that you can compare apples to apples might be, you know, what you would prefer, but maybe you have, you know, one person who is on a multimedia platform like this and someone else, you know, who it's not. So with some you have visual data, some you don't have the visual data because they can't use the camera, you know, and so, you know, then, you know, what those implications are. Well, I want to just, you know, ask if, oh, do you have one more thing to add?
Yeah, I just really quickly, I think as I've listened to folks, what I've written down in my notebook in front of me is layers of erasure, right? We're talking about, and whether you see them as sort of compounding on one another or side by side, right? The erasure of the beeps or the tapping of the cane, the erasure of the way that we do that technology interacts in our research process, et cetera. And when I think about the sort of the root of this conversation, Janet, when you asked about the visual, for example, and we got talking about sound, in the context of the technologies that we use, those things are very rarely done by accident, right? The visual cues and the auditory cues and the cues that we interact with these technologies, they're there on purpose. And so we then sort of, I guess the layer of this on this discussion of erasure that I'll add is that we often either willfully or not ignore that additional layer, which was like these visual cues. For example, we're talking about dating apps to put a point on it. All of the visual decisions that are happening there, they were done on purpose. And so then not only are we sort of adding that layer of erasure of the purposefulness of it, but also the people on the other side of that, right? We're creating this meta people erased technology, erased by people, erased by technology, right? Like over and over again. And those considerations are something that I think are really important, right? Now we're back to like the layers and layers of and the complexity of trying to articulate all these things. But I was hearing these layers of erasure thinking like, oh, what a smart combination of thinking that is happening in this group that I could just get to jump on at the end.
Well, certainly I hope that for the viewers of this roundtable, encourage you, to look at this collection of articles so that you can dig in a little bit more deeply. But, certainly one point that I come out of this with is that choosing what and how you use technology in a study really involves a lot of careful thought. There's tremendous potential, but also considerations that you need to think through and be transparent about, in your work. Is there anything you would like to summarize with, Trena, before we close?
No, I just want to thank everyone for these really insightful contributions to the discussion. This was really fun, and I'm got a lot of ideas brewing in terms of where it might take us all next. So thank you. And thanks, Janet, for the opportunity for us to all have this platform to talk with each other today.
Yes, thank you.